Hi, Steve. Hey, thanks for agreeing to do this video interview with me today over Zoom. For our audience, would you please introduce yourself and give us a little bit, let's start off with, where did you grow up?
My name's Steve Villachia. I'm an associate professor of organizational performance and workplace learning at Boise State University. I grew up in Golden, Colorado, a small place outside of Denver, and probably more famous as the home of Coors beer than anything else.
Here, here. Cheers to that. Yes. So, where did you go to school? What did you study?
I started university work at the University of Denver. I quickly ran out of money. I transferred to the University of Northern Colorado my sophomore year. At first, I thought I was going to be a high school debate coach. And so I was focused on English and a teaching certificate. And late in my university tenure, I was taking my last methods course and realized that I really did not want to teach in a high school. That led to graduating and not necessarily knowing what I wanted to do. Finding a job tutoring English at a community college. And that was enjoyable. I really liked community colleges, and that's where I first started realizing I liked working with adult learners. That led to going back and getting a master's degree from the University of Northern Colorado. From there, my first internship at IBM, I was the world's worst intern. It was not a good fit for IBM. It was not a good fit for me. But again, I really liked working with adult learners. And from there, the Macintosh had just come out. Up until then, I was working with Apple IIe's. And I convinced my brother to buy a Macintosh so I could use it to put together my portfolio. And a little portfolio on teaching word processing to college students landed me my first ID job at McDonnell Douglas. They were my first real formal introduction to ID. Thank you, Jackie Dobrovoni. But it was also a mismatch in that it was a real large organization. And I started applying for work in ads, and this post office box kept coming up, and the job descriptions varied a little bit, but I kept on responding, and it ends up being that was DLS Group. And after a year and a half at McDonnell Douglas, I started working with Deborah Stone and DLS Group, and I worked for them just shy of 20 years. During that time, when I first started off, a lot of our work was software systems training. And DLS Group already had a pretty darn good performance-based training approach for software systems training. But as mainframes started to go by the wayside, we also saw the rise of the knowledge workers. And suddenly everyone's a knowledge worker. And that led me going back to school. By this time, my bride had found employment at UNC, the University of Northern Colorado. So I completed my doctoral work there on the friends and family price structure, which was really helpful. And in 2007, a job opened up in the what now is the Opal department. We say Opal because Idaho is the gem state.
Okay.
Opened up at Boise State, and I've been here since then.
Now, ISPI has a relationship of some sort with Boise State. And how did you get introduced to Boise State itself? Was it through that connection?
It was through ISPI. And so what was really nice is because of ISPI's research committee, I'd already met a lot of the faculty. I'd met David Cox, I'd met Don Stepich. And then later on, when I first was in the research committee, it was Will Tallheimer, who was the chair. Then Mary Norton Thomas and I were co-chairs. And then Tony Marker and Linda Hugland, again from Boise State, took it on after us. And so we met over the phone and in some pre-Zoom meetings. And so by the time that I heard about the opening for the job from one of the faculty members on a plane ride home from ISPI, and I started talking with my bride and said, what about Boise? And she said, well, that could be good. And so we've been here since, and ISPI is the place where we meet our students because Opal is an all online master's program. And ISPI has been the conference where we get to have FaceTime with our students. And it's the conference where we traditionally have been able to meet most of our students during the conference. So we have our own Opal dinner during the ISPI conference.
Yeah, now you and I met back when ISPI was NSPI. I was thinking about this earlier. It must be 30 some years ago. It's we kind of go way back, I think.
I think it's got to be a long time ago because my first conference was in '89, and I'm pretty sure I met you either then or shortly after that because Deborah Stone took me around and introduced me to everybody that she knew, which was one of the greatest professional gifts ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I always liked her, and I've sat in on many presentations that you guys have done. You've done some very interesting work. So let's try and cover a little bit of that. So in this career progression, now some of the work that you have may be top secret, and you couldn't tell us unless you could kill us afterwards. But what are some of the more interesting projects that you've had that deal with instruction or performance improvement or both? What can you share with us?
With DLS Group, we worked primarily with Fortune 100 companies, and also we did some work in national security. We did a lot of performance-based training. I think that's what Deborah Stone cut her teeth on as an ID working at Fort Huachuca years ago. And so performance-based training and large-scale curriculum development. And in our field, there are not a lot of people with those chops, you being the other one that comes to mind. And so we did training for computer software systems and e-learning for people in banks who were upselling products and so on. I think our more interesting work was in performance support systems. This has since kind of morphed into workflow learning and support now, and it travels under a variety of names. It morphed into apps, an app to do that. When we were doing this, people like Gloria Geary and Barry Raybould and so on were involved. And our biggest effort was for people who regulate securities firms that trade on the NASDAQ. And that involved a large-scale performance support system that included different types of skill training using different media, including and approaches, including self-paced training, including low fidelity simulations. These people audit securities firms. And so they go through preliminary training on how to conduct these audits. And they, do this in self-paced training. They do it in instructor-led training. And finally, they reach a point where they do this low fidelity emulation where they have to work together in teams and they have to audit this simulated securities firm. So they have to go in and essentially they have to figure out, does the firm actually have enough money to be trading securities? And are they violating the sales rules? Are they conforming with sales rules? And so we set that up using both company employees and they hired in actors. We also were able to set up, use Margot Murray's work and set up a formal mentoring system as well. And that was the training component. But in addition to the training, we found in our needs assessment that these auditors were responsible for creating their own personal libraries of auditing stuff. And literally they were putting little papers and folders and file boxes in the trunk of their cars when they went to an audit. And when they're in the middle of an audit and they were missing something, they call their friends, and on the fax machines of the folks they're auditing, they get the missing materials. We also found out that the auditing process itself was paper-based and highly cumbersome. So we parts of the performance support system included an online information system. And that online information system was based on the results of a cognitive task analysis where we embedded with the auditors and discovered the questions that they most use to orient themselves to new securities products. And it also led to the creation of exam software that went on their laptops. And so instead of conducting examinations and filling out lots and lots of papers, it all went online. You know, this is the 1990s and this is considered revolutionary at the time. But it was a really fun project and it was nice to be able to do it at a scale where we were able to reduce ramp up time to competent job performance. Before we started working with them, it took 2.5 years for a new auditor to come up to speed. And that's significant because most, typically their job tenure is 5 years, because after 5 years working with the regulators, they switch jobs and they began working for the brokerage firms as compliance officers where they can make big bucks. And so half of their job tenure was spent coming up to speed. And our initial target was to decrease that to 1.5 years. And we were able to go from 2.5 actually down to 1 by the time we were conducting summative evaluations at the end of the project. That was fun. We also did work with performance support, exploring and prototyping design concepts for national security. That's all I can say about that. And the last project I worked on with DLS Group was really fun. It was a cognitive task analysis for the California Commission of Peace Officer Standards and Training, California Post. Every state has a post group for peace officer standards and training. And our job was to represent what detectives across the state do when they conduct criminal investigations. And so we used a number of different cognitive task analysis techniques, and we were able to use a variation on task analysis to represent that. And then we used those representations to conduct a job analysis to verify the higher level duties. And we were able to begin prototyping some of the training that could be associated with this. And then right after getting all that work done, the one of the two project clients retired, and he had pulled in every favor he had to be sure we were able to embed, bring in detectives from around the states who had worked on, had a lot of experience in different kinds of crimes. And with those personnel changes and my leaving for Boise State, we weren't able to pursue that work any further. I've been at Boise State since 2007. We are now an online master's program. And in that time, I've taught our foundations course, course on job aids. I'm currently teaching courses in performance-based instructional design and needs assessment. I enjoy teaching those courses because the needs assessment and the ID course involve our students working with real-world clients doing real-world work. And over time, we notice that it's sometimes hard for students to find clients who have skin in the game, quoting Mark Rosenberg, who are actually really willing to meet the sponsoring responsibilities that a collaborative project space requires.
Right.
And so what's been great there is I've worked with my Opal colleagues, and we now have strategic partners who are local nonprofits. So one is our food bank, another is a youth ranch that works with at-risk kids and their families. We have other partners. One is a no-kill dog rescue. Another is the local humane society. We've done work with the local library system, and we're also doing work with Boise State's HR department. And what's great is all of these relationships are supporting these nonprofits. Students can still qualify their own projects and work on them, but if they can't, they have one of these. And what's nice is, all of these projects are also associated with service learning, which means, the university's learning experiences are aligned with benefiting the community. And there's also a good karma element to these. And best yet, all of our strategic sponsors have track records for being really good sponsors to their student teams. And our rule is that when we negotiate potential projects, we keep going until everybody wins. It has to be good for the sponsoring agency. It has to be good for the client. It has to be good for their mission and the people, the agents, or the critters the agency serves. It has to be good for Opal students. It has to be good for the course and support the course's learning outcomes. It has to be good for the department, Boise State, and the community. And when we're able to hit that sweet spot where everybody wins, we're able to have some really great projects for our students. And I take particular pleasure in noting that our students, many of our students' first experience with performance-based instructional design or their experience with needs assessment is going to be with an organization who takes that sponsorship responsibility seriously. My research has focused on these weird transitions between academics and the workplace. So around 2014-15, I was working with a colleague in the psych department, and we were putting together skills summits where we brought in university people in the same room with business folks with the idea of targeting especially soft skills and some of the technical skills for local jobs, and with the idea of having more alignment there. And that eventually led to finding these nonprofit sponsors. I've also recently been working with those sponsors and a colleague, Rob Anson, who is professor emeritus from IT and supply chain management, and one of our graduate students, Jody Mamenga. And we've been doing process work with the local food bank. Here in Idaho, the population's been growing by leaps and bounds along that property valuations and rent. And so the state's population was already growing. And with that, the number of food insecure people coming into the state. And then comes COVID. And because Opal had already worked with the food bank to do needs assessments and to stand up student projects, we were talking, and one thing led to another, and the connection network flourishes. And we were suddenly working with them to do process mapping. And so we first worked with the people at the docks who received the donations. Then we worked with the people who actually get the donations, the acquisitions group. We worked with the people who repack the donations, and we're getting ready to do the work with the people who distribute it. And in the course of this, we realized, we were almost reincarnating Geary Rumler's work, because when we first started and I'm guilty of this, my perception was kind of based on their perception of the organization, and it was highly siloed. It wasn't until we'd worked with a number of these groups that we realized that no, there isn't an acquisitions process, there isn't a receive process, there isn't a distribute or a repack process. There's one process, it's called food flow, and it cuts across all of those departments. And we've been lucky enough to be working with their executive suite, their CEO, their COO, and their CFO. Have been incredible sponsors, and it's been a marvelous relationship. And I grew up kind of poor, and there were times my family has been on food stamps, and it's really nice to be doing this feed forward where we're able to help the food bank better serve its mission in these times. That had us thinking to the point where we are now working to stand up a process management lab where we can offer this service to other nonprofit organizations. And the reason is that they're typically caught in a horrible kind of dilemma where they're focusing on the mission, and anything that isn't the mission comes at the expense of the mission. So quite often the smaller to mid-size groups we're targeting don't have infrastructures to support workplace performance. And so they rely on tribal lore, they rely on informal mentoring, they rely on meeting compliance requirements, but not necessarily supporting the performance underneath the compliance. And so we offer a mechanism for them to build that infrastructure in ways that benefit the nonprofit who they serve, but also benefit our students by giving them work experience. And part of the agreement for this process management lab we're forming is that they are agreeing to let us use the deliverables and share them. So when you get into process management, most of that is considered, proprietary. That's the secret sauce. That's the mojo. And what's marvelous is that part of the negotiations we're able to work through with the food bank, and we want to work with future clients on is, we want to be able to use these deliverables and make them available to students and make them available to scholars. And so again, it's everybody wins. And that's why I giggle on the way into work. I get to do cool stuff. I work with cool people. I get to do cool things. Life is good.
I am so proud of you. I am so proud of many of the people that we share as mentors and thought leaders that have influenced our work. And it's just so cool to hear this brought to fruition. It makes me think about the late Roger Kaufman, who we just lost months ago, and Mega, social responsibility. And I think that's really cool. So I was thinking about, what follow-up questions do I have, because you said a lot of things, but so my last question was going to be about students being involved in this lab, and you answered that question, and I thought that's really cool. What a great experience. And I think it's lacking from what little I know about other programs in instructional design and performance improvement, but this sounds like a great opportunity, and it's online, and so people can more easily participate in the university's program and in, are they doing all this work with the local community virtually? They must be, right?
Yes, and so we've been all online since 2012. And so we have some students in the Treasure Valley, which is, our fancy name for Boise and the local environs.
Okay.
But most of our students are located throughout the US, and increasingly they're located throughout the world. And so we do this all virtually. And along comes COVID. So right now on all of our student projects, when we negotiate these efforts, part of it is for the things that we set up, an agreement with the client that they don't expect anybody on the team, even if they live locally, to set foot on site. Now, if someone on the team chooses to do that, and if they meet the sponsor's COVID protocols, it's okay. So we've been facile at working projects where sometimes there are local boots on the ground in that project team, and other projects where nobody sets foot on the client premise. It really affected us in process mapping. The first round of this, the first set of workshops, we did on site at the food bank. Along comes COVID. Well, we ain't going to do that no more. So we spent our summer doing a feasibility study to determine how we were going to do this virtually. And we ended up settling on a combination of Zoom and Mural. And that's how we were able to complete the remaining workshops, and that's how we're going to do the upcoming workshops. We also have been using this as a prototyping opportunity because we want to take what we're doing in the process lab, process management lab, and eventually offer a course in this as well. And we had to figure out how to teach this stuff virtually by doing it virtually.
Very cool. Very cool. So earlier you mentioned CTA, cognitive task analysis. You mentioned it a couple of times, and so for our audience, can you give us a short description of what the heck is cognitive task analysis and how do you do it? What's in the secret sauce of figuring out what people are thinking, the covert behaviors that you can't see that are really necessary to teach people how to do stuff?
You hinted at what cognitive task analysis is for. It's to make invisible thinking that underlies performance visible. And it serves the larger purpose of task analysis, which is to represent exemplary or successful performance. And the question becomes, how do you represent successful performance when a lot of it's going up here and you're not necessarily able to see what people are overtly doing? So cognitive task analysis is a mashup of traditional task analysis and these other methods. So people have used different approaches. So in her work, I think she was working with national security analysts who were looking things up. Ruth Clark did a lot of what's called protocol analysis. So she had people actually doing searches, and as they were doing searches, she asked them to do think alouds. She recorded and analyzed the think alouds and was able to then start putting together what people were visibly doing with the thought processes, how, involving situation recognition, complex decision making, things that are a little more complex than an if then or if and then, and problem solving, the heuristics that are guiding their solutions. Dick Clark has used it a lot, working with inside of medicine, specifically surgeons. And so he talked about how surgeons are typically taught with a watch one, do one, teach one, or some variation on that. And then they started using cognitive task analysis involving, I think, some similar data collection methods. and we're able to have surgeons coming up to speed better and making fewer mistakes while being faster. The way we used it at DLS Group is a big shout out to a couple things. One, in the 90s, the Air Force experimented with this, and what they wanted to do was to get their avionics technicians up to speed faster. And one of the big problems with avionics is that you're troubleshooting, and troubles, happen at their own rate. And so if you are waiting for someone to get experience with all the different troubles they can encounter, you can wait a long time. And so Les Gold and his companions wanted to figure out how to decrease that ramp up time. And so they used a cognitive task analysis technique called Perry. And what they did is they had these techs actually troubleshooting. And when they were troubleshooting, they engaged in this protocol where it was, you knew what they had just done, which is the precursor P. Now, what are you doing? That's the A, the action. What just happened? Those are the results, R. And then finally, what's your interpretation of those results? I. So that's Perry. And using Perry, they created a computer-based training program that shrank time to competent performance simply because they were able to get experience solving multiple kinds of troubleshooting very, very quickly. One of the nice things, one of the incredibly smart things that Deborah Stone always did at DLS Group is she used owning her own company as a way to bring in any kind of expertise we needed. And so when we started looking at the work we were going to be doing with the detectives in particular, we pulled in Rob Fauché and Ken Silber, who had just written that text on, along with Mike Stelnecki, on how to teach just about anything to anyone. And we worked with the two of them, and Rob had come up with a variation on Perry that was a little more client friendly. And so instead of PARI, and it's kind of weird jargon, I think we used inputs. What are the things you are seeing? Questions. What are the things in your head that you're trying to answer now? What are some of the decisions you're making? And then finally, what are some of the outputs? And so we used that approach working with the cops, and we were able to embed that in a procedural task analysis. So we were doing task analysis the same way just about everyone else has done, right? You decompose a task. So the task is, change a tire. The task is decomposed into duties, get your tools, jack the car up, swap tires, set it down. The duties are decomposed into subtasks, and those are decomposed into steps. That's the same as it always was. But there are going to be times where you hit decisions and you need to make a decision. Some decisions are really simple if-thens. And the brilliant if-then tables that Joe Harless loved, or the multiple column tables, work really, really well. And so you use those where they're appropriate. Conversely, you use these complex decision tables where they're appropriate. And so in our task analysis, we go through and get the procedural analysis done first. Then we go through and we'd look for cognitive verbs, evaluate, assess, explore, determine. And every time we saw one of those, we'd ask our subject matter experts, what kind of a decision is this? And does the target audience already know how to do it? And there it was a pretty straightforward matter, either to not provide anything because they already knew how to make the decision, or to use an appropriate simple or complex decision table. And we'd work with them on the spot to craft those tables.
Very cool. So is CTA part of the program at Boise State?
Because it's more advanced, no. But our teams are doing real work with real clients, and occasionally they run into those situations.
Mhm.
So it sometimes comes up in project teams, and it can sometimes come up in work experiences.
Cool. I remember reading the book that Fauché and Ken and Michael put together. Is it Michael?
Yeah,
I
Michael
don't know him
Stelnicki.
personally, but I have met him a couple of times. But they had a book on cognitive task analysis, right? You referenced just another book.
They referred to it in how to teach anybody anything, and they had structures for teaching troubleshooting and structures for problem solving.
Okay, it's been a while since I've read that book, and I think it's one of those books that walked away. Somebody borrowed it. Either I lent it to them, or they came and lent it to themselves, and it's disappeared for good. So,
They're
um,
like
yeah, I really enjoyed that book, and I've been talking with Dick Clark a lot about his approach to cognitive task analysis, and trying to demystify it further, because I think it's so critical. One, that people do analysis before they do design, before they do development, and that if you don't have some strategies and tactics for doing the cognitive task analysis, then you're going to be missing way too much. And it's back to informal learning, social learning, which isn't always the most effective or efficient way to learn things, especially if they're regarding high stakes performance, or just things that are critical and to ultimate success downstream. But let me shift gears here a little bit. Thank you for sharing all of that. That's fascinating, and I'm jealous of the students that you guys have there at Boise State, because I'm one of these informal instructional designer types who came in through some side door and have had to climb the learning curve quite differently. But so, and I climbed it, at NSPI, and then later that became ISPI, but I always harken back to the days of NSPI, because that's when, in 1980, when I started learning all this. But I want to explore a little bit about your first exposure to what I'm calling in this video series HPT, Human Performance Technology. Of course, it's known as Human Performance Improvement by the ASTD, ATD crowd. And it's known as other things too, high performance organizations. I mean, it's got a lot of different names for this set of methods and techniques and et cetera for doing improvement. But where did you first get exposure to this? Was it when you joined with Deborah, or was it at school, or so when and where was this, and who were some of the most early influences that you would mention as a means to point our audience to some of those early influences?
It was Deborah Stone at DLS Group. And so the job position read instructional designer. And I thought I'd come in as an instructional designer. And she said, you really don't have the chops for that. You'll come in as a junior instructional designer. But if you do well, you can promote rapidly. Is that okay? Okay. And so I came in as an instructional designer, and I think, she'd been working with me several months to help me ramp up on just the idea alone. And one day, it was a Friday afternoon, and she popped a gin and tonic on my desk. And she said, there's this thing that I've been involved in because her mentor was Ron Fillinger. And Ron Fillinger had introduced Deborah to NSPI and performance technology. And Deborah was telling me about it. And, she said, if you look at what's happening in organizations, there are a lot of different kinds of challenges. And, training, the kind of training we do is good for one of them, but there are a lot of other challenges. Huh? I have a passion for learning. And so, she, walked through, what it was. She walked through how we did it. And, DLS Group, was an earlier an early adopter of that performance improvement angle. It was, from a business model, it was good to be able to expand the range of pain points that we could help our clients address. And then, this is 1987. Around 1988, the local Front Range chapter of ISPI was selected to host the annual conference. And Deborah was part of that, and I forget her title. And one of my professors from the University of Northern Colorado, Ellen Wagner, was part of that. And since Deborah owned the company, we helped with some of the conference planning and so on. And I attended as a volunteer, and my first volunteer experience was with Sharon Schrock and Bill Coscarelli in the criterion referenced assessment workshop they did. And that's where Deborah introduced me to all these people in the field. And so what started happening then also is I learned from Deborah that every time we start a new project, we build some internal money into a literature review. And we review the literature to see what's come out relevant to this new thing we're doing, and how might we want to draw on this new knowledge in our work. And so from that, started bringing in more and more of the HPT folks. And I remember, Deborah and I planning out, sessions we were going to see, and, sitting in on Gary Rumler's sessions together.
That would be my annual booster shot, as I used to tell them. I'm sitting in the front here because it's easier to harass you, but it's also, less distracting if you're sitting way up front. But
and I also get to ask my questions.
Yeah.
And so that was cool. And then the other thing that happened is as this performance support thing grew, because suddenly people like Gloria Gary were doing it, Barry Raybould was doing it, Gary Dickelman was doing it, and the Coast Guard was doing it. And the U.S. Coast Guard, we're lucky enough to get a number of their students who are going through our program. They complete it in a year. And they are phenomenal students, and it's so nice having a leader in performance technology as part of our student base. And this is way back in the 90s when all of this is new and interesting. And so, we'd go into the Coast Guard sessions and see what they're doing with performance support. They'd come into our sessions, and it was a whole bunch of cross pollination. The other influence on that started shortly around that time as we were, exploring instructional changes. We can't just rely on behaviorism anymore if you're teaching, highly cognitive skills. And so met Dave Jonasson through the local Front Range ISPI chapter, and his work in problem solving and instruction is just amazing. The guy classified different kinds of problems and suggested instructional techniques for all of them. And he's one of those we lost way too soon. I also remember in 1989, I'm at my first conference, and I come up with the brilliant idea of Allison Rossett's book on training needs assessment had just come out. So I bought a copy, and I'm real scared, and I walk up to Allison, would you sign your book, please? And that's how I met Allison. And the training needs assessment book was revolutionary at the time, and since then followed all of her work as well. But these are the broad folks that have struck me. Also you've always been a voice about performance-based training, and also how you manage these performance improvement efforts in ways that muster the collaboration from the client side group and the project side group in ways that you're able to pull all this magic off. You know, one of our biggest challenges in performance improvement is when we have client support to use all of our magic, you know, permission to use our mojo, we
Yeah.
can do amazing things because suddenly we're able to work in ways that align with our standards and that align with our ethics. All too often, we don't have those kinds of permissions. And if we don't have those kinds of permissions, then what we can do is very limited. We often tend to kind of fall into the best we can do solutions that may not be the more effective or the more, worse yet, the more valued solutions.
That is so true. That, I think I learned that when I was, especially at Motorola, because I was dealing with 30 manufacturing operations managers, and they were a really tough crowd. I mean, they told, when I used the word exemplar, they said, "Guy, we hate that word. It's a $3 college word. We hate it." And I said, "Well, how about master performer?" So, and then I worked with them, and I had a pilot session that failed because I listened to the corporate SME for purchasing, who I didn't know until after the pilot failed that he had been 7 years out of the field. So he didn't know what was current. And so I asked for an exemplar, and that's when they said they hated that word. And I said, "Master performer, I want somebody who's doing, doing the job." And what I learned from all of that is that I learned to call my interactions with them. I borrowed a phrase from the quality movement, gate review meetings. And I would tell my clients in the very first one, because they hated being there, they hated that there was going to be more of these meetings. And I said, "This is a command and control structure for you." And they would all go, "Oh, well, we like the sound of that because, when we're not in control." And I would say, "But it's also an empowerment mechanism for me, because once you agree what I'm going to go do, then I've got license to go do it. And I may need your support, because if it's really important to do, otherwise let's just shut the whole thing down." And they would go, "Well, what do you mean shut it down here? You're a consultant. You're not supposed to say things like that." So darn hard for most practitioners working on most, the typical average project, which isn't about high stakes performance. And if you're a consultant being brought in, you're working on something that's usually a little bit on the higher stakes level than low stakes performance. But it's so hard to get people to, work with you, to collaborate with you, to get the resources that you need to make the business decisions inherent in all of this, because there are plenty of them.
Well,
That's
and as external consultants, I think it's easier for us to get to that sponsorship.
yeah.
I think for internal employees, it can be a lot harder. And before I forget, other positive role models, Ruth Clark, every book she's ever written on evidence-based training and related aspects. When we needed at DLS Group to restructure what we were doing for performance support and for working with knowledge workers, we had to look at a very different set of processes and a different management structure. And so we borrowed rapid application development from James Martin. Short name is RAD, but RAD is the parent of Agile. And so RAD is what introduced a software development methodology based on participative analysis and design, rapid prototyping, usability testing, special people who are using advanced tools. And later on, Agile comes around and is able to harness that along with the techniques and the concerns in the Agile Manifesto. And one other very heartfelt call out is to your former colleague, Ray Svensson. Deborah and I would always go to the sessions. Sometimes you were doing them together, sometimes they were separately. Later on, Ray was one of the few people at ISPI talking about process. So I learned a lot about process from Ray. And it was interesting when we were in the middle of all those process changes. Deborah was able to finagle some high-end DoD process engineers, people with ultra secret clearances and so on, who did work on missiles. And they helped us restructure our processes, which was great because they were actually on sabbatical. And they looked at us in our biggest project ever. It was, like $1 million something. Oh, that's so cute. And so they helped us. But later on, I came to Boise State, and I was working on an NSF grant looking at how to speed up ramp up time for newly graduated and hired engineers. And one of the things the grant explored was forming a coalition to do that. And we needed a business plan. And I mentioned it to Ray because we'd been in correspondence through ISPI. He said, well, why don't you just come up here and I'll help you build one. And free of charge, I traveled up to Billings, had a marvelous couple days at his place. And by the time we were done, we had a business plan that Lynn Carney later illustrated for us. And, there's some people who have left us, Ray, way too quickly. And Ray is one of them. Dave Jonathan is another. And sorry to have seen them go.
That's so true. I mean, it's funny because a lot of the people that, not everyone at ISPI that was kind of a thought leader, they were engineers. And Ray was a Bell Labs engineer back in the day when they only hired the top 10% of the engineering graduates from the top 10% of the engineering schools. And he was one of those. And he got bored as an engineer and he went into AT&T management and focused on strategic planning. And he was doing strategic planning at Motorola with Bill Wiggenhorn when I met him, and then I left to join Ray in this company. And he is one of my greatest influences, one of my mentors, because I learned so much from him, kind of the engineering approach to things and breaking things down, work breakdown structures, and all that kind of stuff. It was just so yeah. I don't know everybody that you just mentioned, and I don't know their work, but again, it's one of those issues when you come in the side door and you don't get formally educated in all this stuff. Again, I'm extremely jealous of all your students, and if I wasn't such an old guy, I'd probably sign up. And so let's shift gears here a little bit here. As a way of an example for our audience, can you give us your 30-second elevator speech on what you do?
I've got one for performance-based training and one for needs assessment. So I don't have a generic one for the full range of performance improvement. I think the reason for that is it's too encompassing and it's too easy to get lost in our jargon instead of terms that resonate with your audience of an elevator pitch. I recently had a student team that was completing a needs assessment for the no-kill dog shelter. And instead of calling it a performance gap, they called it a challenge. I'm going, yeah. So these are my attempts to try to talk about what we do without pegging the jargon meter. So for performance-based training, it's, and I'm gonna try to read these. We create training that builds skills people need to perform job tasks in ways that meet an organization's strategic business objectives. We work with your best performers to represent how they think and work. We leverage these representations to create training and other support materials that help others in the organization work more like these successful performers. We also work with the organizational stakeholders to make sure that whatever training we create transfers to the workplace so you can see it on the job.
Excellent, I like that.
And that's taken a lot. My positive role models for writing in this field are Ruth Clark, Allison Rossett, and Temple Grandin, who's not in our field. Temple Grandin was featured in one of Oliver Sacks's books. She is Asperger's autistic. She teaches at CSU, and she writes about her experiences, and she's another compelling writer. And I once asked Allison, "You write really well." She said, "Thank you." I said, "How do you do that?" She said, "Well, when I write, I imagine my parents in my head, and I write for them." And since that time, I have tried to write more like Ruth, tried to write more like Allison, tried to write more like Temple Grandin every day. And needs assessment, I've been working on this one because it's interesting. When I'm scouting projects, potential projects, it's a lot easier to scout potential training projects in these nonprofit organizations because typically there's so much done that's tribal lore, and we're able to find sweet spot tribal lore issues where, yes, it's procedural, it'll lend itself to a job aid, it'll lend itself to some introductory training. Those are easy. And what's nice is, there's almost a never-ending supply of them. Needs assessments are harder to sell. One, because organizations don't need as many of them, but secondly, because the idea is more obtuse. And so here's the latest version of a pitch that's under constant refinement. We help organizations address messy people problems and stand up new capabilities. We address organizational challenges and things that keep leaders up at night by removing barriers to desired performance. These barriers exist in the workplace environment when people lack access to adequate information, process, tools, incentives. And they exist when individual people may lack motive or capacity or the skills to perform. Having identified these barriers, we work to identify and stand up feasible solutions that address the challenges.
I like that as well. Under constant refinement. I guess that's the thing with elevator speeches. One, depending on your audience, you got to watch your jargon, save that for your conferences, but otherwise speak in your best bedside manner and use plain English. But it's a challenge for everybody, and that's why I ask for examples so that individuals that are watching this can work on well, how do they tell their story, and how do they modify their story based on who that audience is, who they're talking to, and it's a challenge for people.
It is, and I've come to realize that as a professor type, 75% of what my students get from me is, pretty much the same thing everyone I would have worked with would get. There are things that come out of the pen or the mouth of a senior ID or a project manager or something. 25% of what comes out of me is my responsibility to provide a safe and authentic learning environment where people can master complex learning outcomes based on coaching and feedback and practice. And so there's an implication there that's always been hard for me to address, and that is, among ourselves, we speak a highly rarefied jargon. And with our clients, we need to do something else. Now, we need to use language they understand. And I love your phrase, bedside manner. Interestingly, we're part of Boise State's College of Engineering, and engineers who have to interact with non-engineers, will make the same kind of comment. But it's interesting, our jargon contains a whole bunch of the same terms that can mean entirely different things or related things. And we can use different terms to mean the same things. And we can use a whole bunch of college kind of highfalutin terms to mean things that are relatively simple. Why we want to call it a performance gap when it's a challenge. And Strunk and White would say, always use a shorter word in place of a longer one. I don't know why we want to call it interventions. It's like, when I think interventions, I'm thinking of, bad cable TV reality shows and people that are hoarding, or, people trying to drive to work while doing meth. Our jargon defeats us, but it's my job to help students both come up to speed on our jargon, but also develop that bedside manner. And it's an ongoing challenge and one that I'm hoping to be addressing better as time goes on. I know I've been working on it the 14 years since I came to Boise State. But our requirements are both. We need to be able to converse among ourselves, and we need to be able to converse with everybody else.
I know that's it's hard, and it's so hard for people coming into the field because we have these, as you said, we've got these redundant terms, we've got overlapping terms and concepts, and we've got marketing spin on things. So what Rumler and Gilbert back in the 70s called guidance was later job aids, was later electronic performance support systems, quick reference guides, and performance support, and now workflow learning. I mean, what are you doing to people?
Yeah, when I'm scouting with projects, we call those cheat sheets.
Exactly. They know what that means exactly. So you got cheat sheets. It's the Post-it note that's worn off its stickiness, and now it's using some sort of a tape.
Yeah, right up there by the monitor.
Exactly. Oh, what fun! Oh, we are opportunity rich because we have problems we can address. So let me shift gears here a little bit to the next question. As a lifelong learner, can you share with us what you're currently focused on? What learning curve are you now climbing?
A real fun one, and that's getting back into process management. So at DLS Group, I was involved in some of the process management as we reworked our internal capabilities to provide new services to clients. I was also lucky enough to work with DLS colleagues on several process-related needs assessments for some high-tech organizations. And so I have, based on those experiences, based on the smart people whose works I have stolen and applied, I have some experience there. But this work I'm doing now with the process, what will be the process management lab, has really been fun. And I really am excited about it for a number of reasons. One, because of the notion that we'll only do the work if we are working with an organization's leadership and have adequate sponsorship. But the other thing that's been really nice, in addition to this opportunity for students, is that in process mapping, after you map things out, you start drawing on a lot of stuff that's common to our performance improvement methods. So where are the pain points associated with this process? Where are the disconnects? For each one of the disconnects, there's a cause analysis. Now, what's interesting, and the reason I'm really excited about this, is that when performance improvement people think about cause analysis, we tend to use our cause analysis models, whether it's Gilbert's BEM or Chevalier's updated version, whether it's Geary, Rumler's. There are lots and lots of people who have cause analysis models, and you have one. I've written one with Don Stepich. By and large, they're similar, but there's some important tweaks in them. But typically, because we're part of this performance improvement community, we look at things that are pretty standard across all of those models. The process people are really good at identifying causes associated with the lack of standards, identifying causes associated with the lack of feedback, identifying causes associated with process stuff, and things that we don't think about, like, are we checking for quality afterwards as opposed to building it in? Are we constantly looking for ways to decrease the number of steps? Are we using these kind of strategies to improve quality from day one, et cetera? So they're really good at process. They're sometimes really good with tools, especially if you've got a process person with some ergonomic chops. Now, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. And anything that doesn't kind of fit those, they tend to call human error. And their default solution for human error is go send them to training. Now, what's nice is there's this sweet spot intersection here where we can help. We can get in there and say, well, let's talk about the guidance people have. So with some of our clients, we've had these really interesting conversations about SOPs that meet compliance burden, but they don't actually represent the performance. And so one of the things our process management lab hopes to provide is the ability to write SOPs that actually capture expertise and represent it. And so the area of guidance, the area of tool design. Process folks aren't necessarily good at user interface. And we know from the IT folks that a really intuitive and predictable user interface that follows the workflow of a good process and the thought flow of a good process can do wonders. So there's a way to partner there. We're really good at the messy consequences stuff. You know, as a consultant, I think we all have our safe bets that we can make walking into any organization sight unseen. My safe bet is within 5 minutes, I can find examples of consequences gone bad, where the organization is rewarding the behavior it doesn't want, it's punishing the behavior it wants, or behavior just don't matter at all. And we're helpful there. We're helpful in terms of looking at motives, and more importantly, looking at the interaction between the motives that get people out of bed in the morning and the incentives, that formal part of the consequence mechanism. At DLS Group, we once found out that we prided ourselves on the degree of our medical coverage. And one of our newly hired IDs, who was just a superstar, said, you know, I don't need insurance that good because I'm not old like you. What about giving me a benefit that would let me pursue a master's degree? Oh, duh. Misalignment, right? Incentives, motives. I think capacity and the interaction of capacity and process and tools is a big issue now. One is COVID. The other is the tendency I'm seeing for more and more job descriptions to be nothing more than fantasy. They may have been accurate and complete and representative at one point, but they've slipped away since then. So, you know, we can help with the capacity issue. We can help with that trade-off between individual capacity and what goes in the environment. And then, yeah, we can help with the skills and the knowledge. And so I'm looking at a more unified, yet another darn cause analysis model, but hopefully one that's kind of taking some of the mojo and the magic they use, looking at the process related stuff and mixing it with what we do on the other stuff. So that's the stuff that is having me really excited. The other thing that has me really excited is that our craft is disgraced by the large scale practice of dump and run. Here's your needs assessment. Here's your training. We're done. And we're not doing the hard work to negotiate for orphans in our field, orphans such as good implementation, orphans such as maintenance, orphans such as continuous improvement, orphans such as transfer of skill. And one of the things that's been really neat in our work with the food bank is their leadership is all over this, because this is how they meet the mission in the time of COVID, right?
Yeah.
And we realized that these folks are really good at their jobs. You know, the warehouse people are really good at this complex choreography of things coming in, you know, partial process, being in storage, waiting for repack, coming out of repack, needing to go to a staging area. Each one of these groups in their little silos are incredibly good at their jobs. When we mentioned that, you know, we've now worked together to organize these pain points and we've specified solutions for them, management now wants to hear, you know, how this is going. And oh, they all freak out. You know, the organization had never done that before. So what's really nice is that their leadership was very receptive to the notion that this change management stuff doesn't, isn't really, is just a means to an end. And you're not going to get the ends you want unless you're providing the organizational support for the broad changes that are coming there. And so we were able to work with them to help prep their process leads for the presentations. They were very responsive in listening to us, and they went out and actually hired a chief operating officer who's coming in with a whole bunch of process improvement and continuous improvement chops. It's just great. So that's another place that's been a really neat place to explore, because I think until we police ourselves about, getting out of this dump and run mentality, we perpetuate the problem. And yes, clients don't always give us permission to do right by them, but I would argue it's part of our due diligence to do as much as we can.
Agreed. Hey, I really love this phrase that I've just written down on my piece of paper here. It goes along with workflow, but thought flow. I'm going to write about that. You haven't copyrighted that or trademarked that yet, have you?
No, please make it commonplace.
Is this, who came up with this so I do the accreditation correctly?
Probably Deborah and me over a cocktail.
I think I've shared cocktails with you guys before back in the day.
Well, we should probably remedy that.
All right, well, let me go on to my next question here. And it has to do with our terminology and our language. And I ask, my question is there a performance improvement term or phrase that you would like to define for us? Perhaps you feel it's being misused or misconstrued and you just want to put your spin on it. And if you have more than one that you'd like to share, go ahead and do that. But I'm trying to help people understand that there's all this language issues and semantics issues that one faces when they're coming into the field. So what term or phrase do you have for us?
Well, I've got three. I already gave you one, which is our dump and run practice. I think that's a disservice. The next is our use of the term root cause of a performance gap. In my experience, performance gaps travel in wolf packs, and each gap has its own wolf pack of related causes, and those causes interact. And I think our job as practitioners is to conduct a needs analysis that's thorough enough to be able to say, here are the causes, and here's how the causes interact to produce the performance gap. One of the best examples I've seen of that in our published literature is Gary Rumler's work in his Anatomy of Performance. He's able to say, here's some stuff that's happening at the worker level, and here's how this gets manifested into a process that isn't up to snuff. And here's how that now is affecting the whole organization. And he's not talking about in those examples about, one little single root cause, which is the fault of everything. I think if you are the people who investigate airline accidents, what is it, NT?
Yeah, the Transportation Board or something like that.
Yeah, NTSB. You can do a root cause analysis because it's going to come down to a switch that didn't fire or something that wasn't closed. But human performance tends to be a messy problem space, and I think problems co-occur. And the interesting stuff is in the multivariable space, not trying to inflate the value of one variable to the exclusion of the other. The other thing is I'm lucky enough to work with a variety of really cool colleagues in our department. And, it's one of those true blessings. One of my partners is Lisa Giacomo. And one of the things that she's made me a lot more sensitive about recently is a couple things. One, there's a huge amount of variability in ID practices. So we did some panel discussions at a conference for the Association for Educational Communications and Technology. And in the panel were the two of us and some other IDs. One was a university dean. Another was a industry employee kind of person like Lisa. Another was working with a school system. And we realized that all of us are going under the job title ID, but our day-to-day, what we do is profoundly different. Moreover, when we expand that range, and now we look at performance improvement, it's profoundly, profoundly varied. We have people who specialize in different aspects of it. We have people who may do all of it, but at different scales, smaller efforts or huge efforts. And one of the things, she helped me realize is the variability of our practice. And related to that is, I think people, especially like me, who come from that external consulting environment, need to be a lot more sensitive and careful in terms of how we position our practices. We're lucky because when organizations hire us in, there already is typically a pain point that's sufficiently nasty for somebody to agree to most of our sponsorship requirements. And moreover, because we play in that space often, we're pretty good at negotiating for the sponsorship we need to deliver what we promise. And that's, I was able, working with Deborah, almost 20 years to, typically work inside of that space. If you are an employee in an organization that really hasn't aligned with professional standards, whether they're ISPIs or AECTs, or our ethical standards, whether they're from those organizations or APA or HRD and other professional organizations, I think we need to be careful about saying you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Our field demands. I think Lisa was quite right when she pointed out to me that that approach is in fact a shaming approach. And I think instead of calling people out and dressing them down for not meeting our standards, for not meeting our codes of ethics, I think we need to realize that our shaming could be perpetuating some of the problems we complain about. And more importantly, it isn't going to help us necessarily get the traction in workplace supervisors, lower managers, mid managers, senior managers, executive suites, that we're really going to need to, on a regular and common basis, pull out all of the tools and all of the magic, in our, associated with our performance improvement craft. So I think we need to, spend more time and finding ways to help them build sources of organizational intelligence so that they understand how the organization works and how they can work the organization. And I'm stealing that from Ken Silber and Lynn Carney. And I think we need to find ways to help them strategize how to move their particular organizations. If I'm coming in as an entry-level person and I'm expected to churn out e-learning, and it doesn't matter that it's an information dump, how do I start investigating the space around me to see if I can make, or I can be part of a change in my organization? Or as one of our graduates, a Marine, said, there are times you just got to realize that hill just ain't worth dying for. How do we help them navigate that choice? That's a profound choice. And, given that notion of how to strategize change in the organization, how do we help them convince their bosses and other organizational stakeholders to embrace, what we would call aspects of responsible performance improvement practice? And so instead of, and I don't think we intentionally shame, I think we get on our high horse. Um, But I think we need to be aware that we are probably shaming people more often than we think. And that instead we need to apply our tools, our processes, and our good hearts to partner with them to grow these capabilities.
That resonates. I remember sitting in an ISPI kickoff session where I felt that the presenter, somebody who's very well known, was berating people for, just wanting to do instructional design work when they needed to be looking much broader. And I thought, I'm sure I'm guilty of the same thing, but we need to, we need bricklayers and carpenters and plumbers. We do need general contractors, and if you aspire to be one of those, that's fine. But if you're just a bricklayer, you just need to do really good at that. And we shouldn't be expecting people to, go beyond what their context demands, insists on. And we need to recognize that people have certain constraints, and it's a lot of that are just expectational constraints of the people that you work for. They want an information dump. They don't, our goal is to get the e-learning out here. We don't care what it does, or it's a dump and run kind of thing, as you said. And we need to provide ways for people to develop themselves to meet their own personal goals, but also to deal with their organization as it is, and help them determine what strategies and tactics might they use to nudge the organization to doing something better that isn't, costly in terms of more time and more cost to advance these kinds of things here. But so to me, it's always been the working with the stakeholders. And I often found that, most of the time there's more than one stakeholder. You get a request,
Yes.
comes in a request, a training intervention, I'm using that word intervention, sorry. And, but that's what they expect. And I learned a long time ago that they're probably wrong. They may be mostly right, but they're going to be wrong about, what the issues are that need to be addressed. And I fought often to get my client to form what I called a project steering team of all the other stakeholders. My rule was, who might come out of the woodwork, 9 months later and take exception to what we're doing and how we're doing it. We need to involve them on day one. Now that was always a push. My unsuccessful projects where I did something that never got implemented, it was because what I produced was big, hairy, complex, costly. It was, I thought it would address their issue and solve their problems. But if I hadn't taken a bunch of the right people along on the journey, it looked like overkill in the extreme. It looked like a whole bunch of big reports and everything, and they didn't know how we came to the final conclusion and plan. And so really, I thought it behooved me to try to figure out who those people were and get them engaged to as great an extent as possible up early. And if they wouldn't participate along the way in the gate review meetings, I needed to have them pick trusted lieutenants to attend those gate review meetings to so that gave them the command and control. But then it was always about the communication that needed to go up to those very top people so that they would be aware of what was going on. They may trust the lieutenants that they picked, but when it came time to, pay the piper at the end of the thing to implement it, they were often hesitant and leery of this and thought, oh, the consultants fooled my trusted lieutenants. We're opportunity rich. We have so many challenges, and especially for the new people coming in. So I think that that's good advice, that we have to be careful about what we say and how we say it, so that we aren't shaming people, but encouraging them to look for ways to, improve their own situation given the constraints that they have.
And, maybe in your role as interviewer extraordinaire, you might want to start asking people for the tricks they use to turn situations around. So how do you, I've done that in the webinars that are posted on our Boise State Opal site. And one question was, how do you turn a request, a well-meaning but ill-informed request for training into an opportunity to improve performance? I think there are other questions that we could be asking our established practitioners so that we can share more tricks, more heuristics, more guidance with people who are in situations where they're aspiring to build that sort of sponsorship that would enable them to practice more of our field as opposed to smaller subsets.
So what you just said reminded me of, this was, I think, just before 1985, because Joe Harless wrote an article in Performance Improvement Journal, or Performance Instruction Journal at the time. And he was at the conference, and he got up on the stage, and I can't remember, I don't think it was a keynote or whatever, but he said, and don't say in your whiniest voice, "Are you sure it's a training problem?" And he said, because that was what everybody was saying, don't be an order taker, don't, you gotta push back, and he hated that. That was the advice that we were giving to people. He said, sure, I can help. The answer, he said, is sure, I can help you, and I can help you a little more if you let me do this front end analysis, his phrase for that front end stuff. And yeah, we give, well, we are well-meaning, but we give poor advice to people, as if, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, and just change your mindset and your behavior and you'll be just fine. No, that's a tough thing. But I like the idea of that, and maybe you'll partner with me in starting a new video series to talk with people about the challenges. So let's explore that a little bit more after we're done with this video. Let me shift gears here again to, we're getting close to the end, but not quite there. So my next question is kind of a revisiting of what we may have covered a little bit earlier, but I'm looking for names of people that that were, again, influential to you. And I'd like to know, what their influence was, what their impact was to you. And if there's a personal story that can go along with that, so we can humanize some of these people. Now, they don't have to be people that are generally well known across the field, that you may be just doing a shout out to, some one colleague who had that impact with you. But if you were to talk a little bit about some of the additional people that helped you along the way, you can revisit some of the people you've already mentioned, or cover new people. It's up to you. But who might they be?
As I was preparing to answer that question, it struck me how, what is that folk song, "All My Life's a Circle"? And recently I've been coming back and reacquainting with people I have occasionally worked with and done things in the past. So, you and I are chatting a lot more recently, with your book publication and this than we have for a while. And thank you. Likewise, Judy Hale invited me to her Economics of Ignorance conference, which was really nice, and reacquainted with Rob Fauché again. And several years ago at an ISPI conference, Rob and I were talking about his work, realizing that most of the writing in our field is, he was talking about research in particular, but also about things that go into project deliverables for us, are really forms of argumentation. And so, the notion is, can you construct a prima facie argument? And so we have claims. What are the supporting evidence for those claims? How do we weave those together, using logic to have something that stands up to some sort of scrutiny? And I have a lot of students who come into our courses, and I used to be guilty of this. University composition courses like teaching people to write in long paragraphs, and they think that longer sentences are more intelligent than shorter ones. And if you're in engineering, they teach you to write in a nominalized form that uses lots and lots of passive voice. And so students come into my class and no, clients don't like reading stuff like that. So you're going to have to learn some ID writing techniques. And so a call out to Rob, who resurfaced, when I needed him to provide that guidance about, no, you're having to provide a rationale. This is about building an argument. What's the evidence in support of this claim? And in Judy's conference, he did a section comparing belief-based practice to evidence-based practice. And what was nice is that in a few short minutes and some nice, clear diagrams, he had a nailed version of that was written in pretty much layperson language. Just brilliant. Likewise, I've known Judy Hale for a long, long time. And she was the one that first introduced me to the marvelous phrase, the conference mafia, as I started presenting at conferences. And so I'd see, the whole host of us, not only at ISPI, but other conferences as well. Anyway, Don Kirky and I were teaching our needs assessment course last semester. And we wanted to bring someone in to talk about especially the environmental scan, how you start framing the performance gap in terms of the levels of performance, but really the context, how does this relate, from the workers to the jobs and processes, to the organizations, to the larger society, both in terms of how this organization affects society, but how society also affects this organization. And Judy was kind enough to share her environmental scan tools with us, and that's now a webinar on our Opal page. But it's a thank you, for getting reacquainted again. And we're now using, in addition to that environmental scan model of hers, in her 2006 second edition of the Performance Consultants Field Guide, she brings out this idea of intervention families, and we're using those now in this course, and our students are finding them helpful. In that if you have these kinds of causes that are producing the gap, these are some broad intervention families that might address those causes. And inside of those families, here are specific ideas that might work. And what's nice is it's one of those pieces that also provides guidance, going back to our friend Tom Gilbert, about how to select those interventions. And it has worked really nicely with other practitioners' work, that picks up once you've selected some interventions, how do you work with clients and other stakeholders to find the feasible ones that could actually work in that organization. And so, I've been in this field a long time, and it strikes, as I go through the circles, I'm so thankful for the people that are still here and I'm reconnecting with. There's so many I miss at each new conference. Sometimes, it's that they're retired, and in retirement, they're doing what they really, really want, and it's a happy story. And so many people seem to have graduated from a job to, their happy place in retirement. There's so many others that have passed, and some of them so young. And I think, now that I'm older, the circles, are important. And I really value this opportunity that we've had to talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So my final, we're doing a wrap up now, and there's kind of it's one last question, and it's, do you have any parting words of wisdom or guidance for our audience, especially those who are new to the field, related to all things performance improvement? So you deal with a lot of students, so I think you're speaking to, the student population, but there's others who for whatever reasons can't join a formal program. But what guidance can you give to new people to help them as they begin this climb of that learning curve?
Deborah gave me years ago the sound advice of get involved in ISPI and get involved with their leadership. And I wouldn't be here without that connection. And so I think my advice is get involved in the professional organizations that support our practices. And not only get involved in terms of being a member or participating in the meetings or some of the workshops or the events, but also get involved in their leadership. I think I learned more about how to manage people as part of the leadership of the Front Range chapter than in any formal training I ever had. And the reason was in a volunteer organization situation, all you have is people's goodwill and their resilience. How do you work with that? How do you help people find things that the chapter needs that they really want to do? How do you help them avoid things that they may want to do that might not be in the chapter's best interest? But it was a marvelous proving ground. And while, and I'm really young at this point, not now, but I also found mentors and people who were willing to help me, and all sorts of different people from all sorts of different parts of our field. And I've maintained those connections for a long time. And I think get involved and get involved in the leadership. And so our Boise State Opal department is part of now what is the Bay Area Boise State chapter of ISPI. And I encourage our students to to become a member, but also to become actively involved in the chapter, because it's a place to grow leadership chops. It's a place to work with the people who write our books. It's a place to find mentors and to learn cool things from really smart people. I encourage them also as they're considering how to give back to their communities, consider doing performance improvement work for the good volunteer organizations in your community. One reason that we have settled on them in terms of our Opal strategic partners is that owing, and probably to some of my limitations as a consultant, it was really hard scouting projects, sometimes in the workplace. And it makes a lot of sense. If you're a for-profit organization, you may not want students in a course working with, essentially something incredibly confidential like your secret sauce. If you're trying to find projects in government settings, there are lots of regulations that can potentially get in the way. If you're interestingly, we've been able to do some pretty cool projects for the US Coast Guard owing to our Blue Suitor students. And they've been a phenomenal sponsor, always hoping to do more and always hoping to do other work with our other people in the military services. One reason that we have these relationships with our nonprofit sponsors is they're focusing on their mission and they don't have infrastructure, and they're like a lot of others. And I think helping these worthy nonprofits build their infrastructure is a real feel-good, good karma, good practice space for us performance improvement people. And I encourage other people to do it as well.
I think that's such good advice. When I went to my first NSPI chapter meeting back in September of 1979, and it was a 75-mile drive from Saginaw to Detroit. And on the way back, it's like 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night, and there's three of us in the car, and I'm new and excited about all these people that I've met and what I heard. Danny Langdon happened to be the first speaker. And on the way back, I was told, oh, we signed you up for the newsletter committee. So I got sucked in right at the very beginning. People don't tend to do this anymore, but back in the day, yeah, your boss would tell you, oh, I signed you up for this this extra work outside of work, and there's no extra pay. And I have been so thankful that happened to me. But the advice of looking for opportunities to apply and extend yourself different from your work setting with local groups that are doing things that are resource constrained and can always use helping hands. And that may not be going in there to do instructional design or performance improvement work. It may be just lending a hand until you build some credibility with those people that might entertain your thoughts about maybe create some job aids, or maybe we should look at our process and reduce the the number of handoffs or whatever the issues might be, as you first get in there and surveil what's going on, and extend yourself in that kind of an approach. But so I think that's excellent advice, and it really rang true with me with what you said. Steve, thanks so much for doing this interview here. I almost feel like we need to kind of do a part two, because there's probably more that we could have gotten into, but I appreciate you taking the time and doing this with me and sharing your thoughts and advice for others. Have a great day.
You too. What a hoot. Thank you.
Cheers.
You too, friend.